So, I've been making sound design videos about every week for the past month with the intent of better showing off my creative process. And I think those videos have largely been working as intended, but I've noticed a trend in them, especially videos with entirely new sounds, like my Glory Kill video, where during editing of the video, I end up trimming out a lot of the actual process in order to avoid making the video excessively long. So what I'm experimenting with right now in Reaper is using the breaking of the turkey bone sounds. I feel like that wasn't soloed for some reason. I end up summarizing it all pretty well, I think, when I discuss it, but I wanted to actually go a little deeper and attempt to loosely delineate what my creative process is. In addition to a description with examples across my portfolio, I'm also going to discuss in the context of another sound I'm hoping to work on soon, which will be giant mechanical gears, a la the bowels of Castlevania. So, without further ado. So then, step 1. What should it sound like? So with the clerical discussion of task assignment out of the way and set aside, let's talk about how I end up thinking of what something should sound like. So for something relatively blank slate, like the confirm and cancel sounds I did for the Overwatch menu, this ends up being me asking myself what kind of sound fits best with the product. I discussed this a little bit in my original video for those sounds, where I analyzed other user interface sound design, with like Resident Evil 8's menu being very diegetic in the context of a typewriter, and others sounding like Halo and Overwatch being very technological in their sound. I ultimately decided to go for a heavily processed technological approach to fit Overwatch. When I already have some direction, it's definitely more obvious of an answer to the question of what it should sound like. The Glory Kills video is a good example of this. I already have a benchmark of it sounding very visceral, violent, and organic, so why wouldn't I be headed that way? Whichever path I end up taking at the end of this planning step, it ends up often taking the form of adjectives as goals. Violent, visceral, organic, mechanical, technological, heavy, succinct, cute, etc. For the Castlevania gears I'm hoping to work on, I'd definitely describe the sound as heavy, succinct, mechanical, and potentially metallic. I don't want to get married to the word metallic, just because stone or wood could actually work better for the sound capturing. But it's good foundationally as an adjective with a goal in mind. Thus, we're on to step 2. How do I make those sounds? What is the groundwork? And where do I start? So, to me, this really splits off into 2 pathways. 1, do I record live audio? 2, do I synthesize audio? Both can actually happen. Like, if I were designing a sound for a biomechanoid of sorts, I would easily expect to be doing both. But from a standpoint of groundwork for a specific effect, it's usually one or the other as a starting point. Oftentimes, my sound design includes live audio as a starting point, which, when it does, I have to ask myself, what sound can I manipulate to achieve this? As mentioned in other videos, I've used whatever I had around me in the past, like the central air system in my house. One example I haven't discussed yet involves sound I've done for role-playing games. I've made some sounds and music for, or inspired by, the Dungeons & Dragons campaigns that I participate in. One was supposed to be a really folksy tune, where I thought some boot stomping would fit well. So I just pounded my fists on my desk to get a good boot stomp. In a soundscape that I did for Dark Caverns in that same campaign, I really used anything I could around me to fill the ambience, like some stones, guitar picks, sound of me moving things. Over the past month, this question has often taken the shape of what cheap objects can I buy at the dollar store or grocery store. For the gore sounds of the glory kill, I bought turkey wings and a rotisserie chicken that I repeatedly just decimated. And I also bought some toy slime in case that would prove useful. While working on that, I realized how incomplete it sounded as just the squelching flesh and the cracking bones, and recorded some screams on the spot for the predator's death scream. Should be fun. In my most recent video where I was making gunfire sounds, I got the cap gun from the dollar store. Funnily enough, I was actually looking for a wind-up toy at the time. My brainstorming for the Castlevania gears was to find a wind-up toy, or like a disposable camera, and pitch shift the sound of its gear mechanisms, its wind mechanisms. I didn't find what I wanted, so I kept brainstorming, and I figured I could use the iron in my house. It happens to have a nice wind-up mechanism for the power cable. And I think it's going to be better too from a sound design standpoint, as it's already deeper in tone than a wind-up toy would probably be, and I can make the sound more discreet by easily just pulling slower. Going the route of synthesizing a sound is less common for me, in part because I'm still figuring out what I'm doing in that department. Knowing that all sounds are just the summation of multiple sine waves, additives and subtractive synthesis have long been on my list of skills for improvement. Most prominently, I did this synthesis with my power noise. As we approach it gets louder. Though other examples in my portfolio right now include some explosive and weapons sounds. That I attempted a few months ago. Knowing that fully synthesizing a sound is complicated, and also that a lot of sound designers primarily go the route of live audio, or at the very least, sample packs, it's not something I'm too bothered by that I feel a little weak with. That being said, I do want to improve that part of my toolkit in the future. And now we arrive at step 3. Recording, manipulation, and experimentation. Obviously, recording or synthesizing the sound is the first step. That's fairly straightforward, with one of the only complications being microphone placement and proximity. If a sound is loud enough, I commonly record samples that are close and far, both for loudness purposes and also natural decay purposes. It's also not uncommon for me to have multiple microphones set up. In the context of sound synthesis, this might be a matter of what synthesizer I start with. Once I've captured or generated the foundational elements of my sound, I then move on to manipulating and experimenting with it. Often, manipulation of the sound takes the shape of pitch shifting. Looking at the glory kill again, I had raw audio of the turkey wings in parallel with 4 other pitch shifted tracks and appropriate EQ treatment for each. This let me give the sample a lot more depth, as I was able to give the bone crunching and flesh squelches more high end and low end. Another manipulation I've done in the past is time distortion. A good example of this being the gunfire sound that I made recently. A couple layers of the audio are not only pitch shifted down, but are also played back slower than the rest of the raw sample. And I did that because with a lot of big sounds where you'd notice both the high and low end information, there's a change of character as the sound decays, such that at the start or attack of the sound, you have your most prominent high end information, But while the sound continues and decays, you end up with your mostly low end and body. Dilating the time helped me fake that for that sound, since the decay of the low end was thus longer than the rest of the sample and other parallel pitch shifted layers. This, of course, depends on the context of where you're hearing the sound. Like, if I were to hear an explosion from very far away, I'd mostly get the rumble, because by the time the high end would reach me, it would probably have already decayed. It definitely depends on context, but as a rule of thumb, the low end becomes more present after the high end in the attack. Other effects may end up happening at this stage. For example, if I had a voiceover line that was supposed to sound like it was coming from a biomechanoid, I might experiment with some distortion and modulation effects, like a phaser or a flanger. Or perhaps for like a transmission that was struggling to make it to the recipient, I'd automate some pitch shifting maybe to have the voice warble before the equipment processes it into the correct register. Lately, it's becoming more common for me to put multiple samples over each other as another technique to add mention, and just another way to manipulate what I'm getting. With my planned Castlevania gears, I'm expecting to be mostly pitch shifting my sample downward. More will likely happen once I'm experimenting. I'm also thinking about adding the sound of like chains. I might theoretically use the chain that I'm wearing on my neck right now. But whatever I can do to get mechanical noises. So finally, we arrive at step 4, self-evaluation and reiteration. Really, the end point of making a sound for me, I ask myself if I'm getting what I wanted. For a lot of these videos, that happens while I'm making the video, as I ask myself while I'm assembling the video with the audio whether it's working or it needs more. Really, at that point, it's just a matter of deciding what happens next. Do I reiterate? Do I record more? Or are we good to go? So, in my script for this video, I had a step 0 originally, and I ended up tagging that on to this end of the video. Because it was really just answering a question of, do all these steps happen linearly? Which, no, they don't always happen linearly. And B, of just how you get assigned a task. Right now, all of my tasks are by my own initiative. That being said, in this section I did still demonstrate some other sound design stuff, so back to the original recording. Like for the Overwatch video, those menu sounds, I actually started at how to make this sound, as noticing that Blizzard's sound design sounded very much like playing cards, and so that was my obvious starting point, and I actually used playing cards as the foundation in that sound. For a sound I did years ago in place of the Halo 4 beam rifle, it was actually the result of a challenge, that I found online. That sound was constructed with, if my memory serves correctly, the sound of ripping paper, a stone, and my glasses on my desk. The gunfire sound is another example of things just happening as they happen. I had no other goal with it, really, than to just make cool, realistic gunfire sounds. Which is why that wasn't superimposed over any game footage. There was no specific inspiration for that one. With that, I hope my overall creative process is made a little bit more clear. The specific story of each sound, of course, changes during the process, though I hope I've given a bit more insight into how I make decisions along the way. Until next time.